We went in, he sat down, he said, Marlene, I have bad news. Susan was, Susan was found in the trunk of her car. I said, what do you mean? He said, Susan was murdered.
Taraskiewicz was a Northwest Airlines baggage handler at Logan Airport. Her body was found in the trunk of her car in Revere, a day and a half after she had left the airport to get sandwiches for coworkers.
On Saturday, September 12, 1992, Susan Taraskiewicz, a 27-year-old woman from Saugus, Massachusetts, headed to work. Susan was an employee at the Logan Airport near Revere, Massachusetts, and worked as a baggage supervisor. That particular night, Susan was scheduled to work from 11 p.m. on September 12, 1992, till 7 a.m. the next day. However, around 1 a.m. on Sunday, September 13, 1992, Susan left the airport in her car, saying that she was going to get some sandwiches for her coworkers. Sadly, Susan never returned. Just the next day, on September 14, 1992, Susan's car was found abandoned in the parking lot of an auto repair company. When the detectives arrived to look into the matter, they found Susan's body stuffed into the trunk of her car. An investigation into the case made the detectives uncover Susan's life of suffering and a fraudulent scheme. What happened to Susan that night when she left the airport? What was this fraudulent scheme, and was it related to Susan's murder? Saugus, situated in Essex County, Massachusetts, is a charming town nestled within the vibrant greater Boston area. This historic gem, known for its rich heritage, Saugus boasts a tapestry of historic landmarks, exceptional public services, and a thriving local business community. Although Saugus offers both its residents and visitors a warm and welcoming community with a crime rate that aligns with the national average, the town isn't safe from all the dangers. This takes us back to a night in 1992 when 27-year-old Susan Taraskiewicz wandered into the dark and never returned home. Susan Taraskiewicz, affectionately known as Sue, was born on February 13, 1965, to her parents Ron and Marlene Taraskiewicz. Her childhood unfolded in Saugus, Massachusetts, where she shared her formative years with her brother, Ronald, and her sister, Deborah. Throughout her high school days, Sue was both creative and authentic. She enjoyed roller skating, running track, and making art. With the remarkable talents and intelligence Sue possessed, her teachers described her as a gifted person. She had a kind and giving nature, always wanting to help others, and was seen as a good-hearted person with a warm smile. Her friends and family described her as feisty, yet warm and compassionate. She was a quiet and kind student who loved the Snoopy character from Charles Schulz's wildly famous comic strip called Peanuts. There was also a time when Sue was an inspiring cartoonist and even traveled to San Francisco to meet Charles Schulz in person. Upon her graduation from Saugus High School in 1983, Sue continued her educational journey, enrolling at Salem State College, North Shore Community College, and later the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. Sue's life was marked by her creativity, kindness, and a determination to follow her dreams. Sue ultimately landed a job with an airlines company in 1989. Sue made history by becoming the second woman to join Northwest Airlines as a ground services employee on the ramp at Logan Airport in Boston. Working in a male-dominated airline industry, Sue faced numerous challenges, as she was often subjected to harsh treatment by her coworkers. But she was fearless when it came to displaying her capabilities and standing her ground. Her responsibilities included loading and unloading baggage and de-icing planes. Despite the occasional hectic nature of her job, Susan rarely had any complaints. During Sue's time at Northwest Airlines, she went from cleaning jet interiors to achieving yet another milestone in her career in 1992.
It went from 3 different jobs, boarding, she did cleaning the planes, but she wanted to get on the ramp so bad. And the thing that she liked the most was de-icing the planes. So she fought for the job for 3 years. They gave it to another male employee that could not do the job. She was more qualified. She fought for 3 years and got it, and she got all her back pay for it. She handled it very well. She'd come home and say, I handled 100,000 bags today, or whatever. It's not a job I wanted her to do. And I told her that I didn't think as a female, especially back then, it was a job for women. But she said that's what she wanted to do. And I said, well, as long as you're careful, and remember, you are a female.
Sue's determination and loyalty towards her work didn't go unnoticed, and she was handed the role of baggage supervisor, which made her the first woman ever to hold the position for Northwest Airlines at Logan Airport. With the barriers she broke within the airline industry, Sue's professional journey paved the way for many young women to follow their dreams. Although Sue liked working at the airport, she often found herself dreaming about becoming a firefighter someday. And soon, Sue's career path took an unexpected turn when she took the firefighter placement exam and excelled at it. She secured the 8th position on the reserve list for the Swampscott Fire Department and was hoping to join the force soon. Sue was clearly not afraid by the idea of entering other male-dominated industries. She was a career-driven woman, and she was not going to let anything stop her. Sadly, before Sue could hear back from the Swampscott Fire Department, something awful happened. Although Sue lived with her parents, her hectic work schedule often kept her busy at the airport. A lot of times Sue would work overnight and weekend shifts, which frequently took her away from her home, making her miss out on the time she would get to spend with her family. Marlene, Sue's mother, recalled that there were days when she and Sue would hardly get to see each other. Their interactions had been limited to brief passing moments. Marlene would only know that Sue was home when she noticed her work uniform left in a heap of laundry just outside her bedroom door. It was Saturday on September 12, 1992, and Sue had been scheduled to work another night shift which began at 11 p.m. and would end by 7 a.m. the next day. It was one of the busiest shifts, and Sue knew that it was going to be a long night. Although having worked for Northwest Airlines for more than 3 years, Sue had learned her way around these kind of shifts. She knew which hours would be less packed and which ones would not even let her breathe. While working her shift around 1 a.m. on September 13, 1992, Sue offered to fetch some sandwiches for her crew members. She drove her sky blue Toyota Tercel off the airport grounds and headed towards her go-to restaurant in Revere. Hours went by, but Sue never returned. Back at home that same morning, when Marlene didn't see Sue's uniform in the laundry heap, she didn't pay much attention to it. Since Sue worked overtime in the past, Marlene thought that Sue probably got caught up with and would return later. The next day, on Monday, September 14, 1992, Marlene noticed that Sue still wasn't home and the laundry pile was empty. It was unlike Sue to not come home for 2 days in a row without informing her family. That was when Marlene grew concerned and called the airport to check if Sue was okay. To her surprise, Marlene found out that Sue had never shown up for work on Monday, September 14, 1992. As fear crept in, Marlene reached out to the authorities and reported Sue missing.
I got in my car and went to Saugus Police Station. Went into the police station and a female officer asked what she could do for me. I said, I'm here to report my daughter missing. The phone rang. She excused herself and came back and said, Mrs. Taraskiewicz, we found your daughter. We've lived in Saugus 32 years, so we knew the chief of police. She said, you need to go in. We went in, he sat down, he said, Marlene, I have bad news. Susan was found in the trunk of her car. I said, what do you mean? He said, Susan was murdered.
That same morning, on Monday, September 14, 1992, a manager for Bravo Auto and Tire Service Company, which was located almost 4 miles from Logan Airport in the town of Revere, was heading to work around 7:30 a.m. Driving through Lee Burbank Highway, commonly known as Route 1A, he noticed a car parked in the Services Center parking lot. He couldn't recall anyone from his workplace having that car. When he walked up to the vehicle to have a closer look, he found blood dripping from the trunk of the car. He rang up the authorities to look into the matter, and shortly after, officers from Massachusetts Police Department arrived at the scene. The detectives instantly recognized the car. It was the same sky blue Toyota Tercel Marlene had described to them when she reported Sue missing. Slightly aware of what was coming next, the detectives opened the trunk, and their eyes were met with a gruesome sight. 27-year-old Susan Taraskiewicz's blood-covered body had been crumpled up and stuffed inside to fit into the small area. Sue had bruises and stab wounds on her body, which implied that she had been beaten up before being stabbed to death. The detectives broke the tragic news to Sue's family. Ron, Sue's father, pulled himself together and held Marlene in his arms as she burst out crying. When the detectives searched the car, they found that the money Sue was going to use to buy the sandwiches was still with her. This implied that she never made it to the restaurant that night. Even though Sue had neither been robbed or assaulted, her family initially assumed that the attack on Sue was not planned. The detectives, too, at first thought that Sue's murder was a random act of violence and believed that she was killed somewhere else before being driven to the auto shop. But as the investigation progressed further, detectives found themselves uncovering a much deeper conspiracy, which led them back to Logan Airport, Sue's workplace. When questioning Sue's coworkers, detectives found out that Sue had received a phone call from someone right before she left to pick up sandwiches for her coworkers on the night before her disappearance. Finding out who this caller was became the utmost priority for the detectives. Even after spending hours conducting interviews with Sue's crewmates at Logan Airport, detectives couldn't identify who this person was. Nobody at Sue's workplace seemed to have a clue or cared enough to even ask Sue about this mysterious caller. Questioning Sue's family, neighbors, and friends wasn't of much help either. Marlene, Sue's mother, believed that Sue might have gone to meet the person who was on the other end of the phone that night, but she would never have gone alone. According to Marlene, Sue was a careful woman who was aware of the dangers that lurked in Saugus. She would never go out alone during those hours of the night. Furthermore, Sue's co-workers told the detectives that when Sue didn't come back to the airport, the thought that something bad had happened to her never struck their minds. And instead of reporting Sue missing, they marked her time card till the day her body was found. According to Sue's attendance log, she had returned from the sandwich run, left for home at the end of her shift, and returned to work the next day. When the police asked the reason behind this, they said that they were covering for her. However, Marlene was very suspicious about this. The very first question she asked Sue's coworkers was if Sue had ever done this before, if Sue ever left work and did not come back. There was a sense of regret on the faces of Sue's coworkers as they replied with a no. Marlene still couldn't understand why no one at work reported Sue missing. Extreme thoughts were taking over her mind as she sensed some sort of foul play from the coworkers. She wondered if there was a cover-up of some sort involved and asked the detectives to look closely into it. On Saturday, September 19, 1992, a funeral service for Sue was held at the Bisbee Porcella Funeral Home, 549 Lincoln Avenue in Saugus. Dozens of her loved ones gathered and mourned the loss as Sue was laid to rest. The investigation surrounding Sue's case took a serious twist when two of her coworkers, Joseph Nuzzo and Robert Bobby Brooks, were identified as potential suspects in Sue's murder. Amidst the complex web of relationships between the three of them, it was revealed that Sue and Brooks briefly shared a romantic relationship that didn't end well. Since then, Sue tried to avoid any contact with Nuzzo and Brooks because she would almost always end up getting in trouble. One time, Brooks even broke Sue's radio for no reason at all. When Sue's then boyfriend confronted Brooks about the same, he verbally threatened him and Sue. In another incident which took place sometime in April 1989, Sue attempted to intervene in a physical altercation involving Nuzzo and two other colleagues. Nuzzo's response to this was far from appropriate. He resorted to throwing derogatory slurs aimed at Sue. The severity of his behavior led Northwest Airlines to temporarily terminate his employment, which was a much-needed action. Even during his time off, Nuzzo didn't let go of the strong grudges he held against Sue. In roughly 6 months, Brooks made an unsettling return to Northwest Airlines, gaining his employment back, all while nursing hate toward Sue for his prior dismissal. All the hatred and resentment Nuzzo harbored was unleashed as a wave of harassment directed at Sue. He vandalized her car, punctured her tires, stalked her residence, made anonymous threatening phone calls, and confided in others, including Brooks, about his desire to take revenge on Sue. The brewing tensions and ominous events painted a picture of a sinister and unsettling chapter in Sue's life. Now that the detectives had figured out what went down between Sue, Brooks, and Nuzzo, they were determined to find out more about the two men. And in no time, the detectives made yet another scandalous discovery. In the summer of 1992, Northwest Airlines had been connected to a federal investigation. As a group of cunning baggage handlers ran a stolen credit card ring, an intriguing and illicit operation came to light, which had been going on right under the nose of their unsuspecting employer at Northwest Airlines. Their scheme revolved around intercepting shipments of fresh credit cards being transported on Northwest jets. These employees weren't just handling baggage, they were running a multi-million-dollar scam. Their operation was both bold and effective. They stole the credit cards, utilized them for their own gain, going on shopping sprees until finally peddling them to eager buyers. The final tally of their gains from this fraud was staggering, reaching a jaw-dropping total of over $7 million. And not so surprisingly, the scandal was led by Joseph Nuzzo himself. As soon as Nuzzo joined the airlines again, he began stealing credit cards from mailbags. He was very careful though, making sure that nobody was watching when he did the awful deed. However, Nuzzo knew he couldn't go on forever without his employees finding out about his secret, and so he started to loop in his other crewmates along with him. Brooks became a part of it as well. By August 1992, credit card companies started asking questions, and Nuzzo and his gang could feel the noose of suspicion tightening around their necks. Later that same month, Nuzzo was fired. Along with a few other baggage handlers, Nuzzo was subpoenaed by a grand jury, and the case was still being looked into. Detectives investigating Sue's murder were able to link her case to the scam led by Nuzzo because of two major reasons. The first being that Nuzzo believed Sue had ratted him out to the authorities. Nuzzo didn't shy away from expressing his anger towards Sue, even though she claimed that she didn't have a clue about the fraud that had been going on. Nuzzo harassed her and warned her that if she testified against him in court, she would face severe consequences. However, the detectives' suspicions grew stronger when they learned that just 1 week after Nuzzo was fired because of the whole incident, Sue was found murdered. Even though Nuzzo denied having anything to do with Sue's murder, he was now a potential suspect in the case. But the detectives were unable to uncover any evidence that could strongly link Nuzzo to Sue's murder. With no new evidence or any potential leads, the investigation into Sue's homicide lost pace, and the case eventually went cold. A year passed, and there were still no signs of Sue's murderer being found. All her family had was many unanswered questions. There wasn't a day that went by when Marlene didn't think about the question, who could have wanted Sue dead? Marlene left Sue's room untouched, just as she had left it. Marlene couldn't gather the strength to walk in, as it would bring back a whirlwind of Sue's memories, eventually making her realize that there weren't going to be any more of those. She tried to do so before, but the pain was too much to bear. But later in 1993, when Christmas was just around the corner, Marlene finally walked into Sue's room for the first time since her murder. She wanted to get something that belonged to Sue and reminded everyone of her, so she could put it by the Christmas tree for the holidays. Upon entering Sue's closet, Marlene's eyes fell upon her daughter's briefcase lying on the floor. She opened it, and amongst the many other things that were inside, she picked out Sue's diary. Unaware of the pain coming her way, she flipped through the diary. Her heart ached as she read the disturbing revelations Sue had penned across pages. In gut-wrenching detail, Sue had described the torture and harassment she had silently endured during her time at Northwest Airlines. These were painful incidents that Sue had never shared with her family. And as the diary bore witness to Sue's suffering, she continued to speak from beyond the grave.
I found a diary where she had jotted down a lot of things, you know, what they were doing and things like that. And that's when it started to really escalate.
Within those pages, Sue had talked about the disturbing graffiti and quotes that her male co-workers had etched in the airport's men's rooms, and even the cargo holds of jets. All of those were directed at Sue and were insulting, demeaning, and extremely malicious in nature. The extent of the cruelty and harassment detailed in Sue's diary left Marlene in complete shock. She was aware of Sue's struggles with her male colleagues who were resistant to the idea of having a female boss. But the diary entries revealed a much graver situation than she had ever imagined.
She said the men gave her a very hard time. A lot of times they didn't want to do anything, and she'd get stuck doing it. And she said it really aggravated her because she knew they just didn't want her as the boss.
The situation grew even more distressing when Sue discovered a disturbing illustration on her own locker. The sketch showed a coffin adorned with Sue's name on it. Sue had finally had enough. She refused to suffer in silence anymore and took a stance by filing numerous formal complaints with both Northwest Airlines management and her union, hoping that there would be a better work environment for herself and the other female employees. However, the response from management proved to be deeply disheartening. Instead of addressing the issue, they offered Sue some cold advice, urging her to let it go. They even recommended her to not show any signs of being bothered by the harassment and instructed her to simply sit back and ignore it. But no good ever came from it. In the end, Sue always found herself alone and helpless, as anyone who would step in to defend her would face threats and abuse at the hands of their dominant coworkers. The harassment didn't end at the workplace. In her diary, Sue documented a series of distressing anonymous phone calls that she received during almost all the nights she had spent at home. She even recorded a couple of those haunting calls. In one particular unnerving instance, the caller taunted Sue with the words, "Get off our backs, Sue T. baby." When she ordered the caller to reveal their identity, the caller remained silent, adding another layer of fear and apprehension to her already troubled existence. Surprisingly, Sue's diary only covered her initial 8.5 months in her new position. However, it appeared that the discrimination against her still went on at Northwest Airlines. Even in the face of such mistreatment, her determination remained steady. She confided in friends and colleagues who stood by her side and gave her the boost to stand up against her tormentors. Sue was aware that if she resigned and walked away, it would only be a win for her male coworkers who had been harassing her. She was not going to let that happen, as it would make it even more difficult for other women to get a job here. Sue's plan was simple. She would continue to show up for work daily and diligently perform her job, making a statement that she wasn't going to give up. Amidst the shocking content, Marlene couldn't help but wonder if this relentless harassment might have played a sinister role in Sue's tragic murder. The diary was a chilling testament to what Sue had endured during her employment at the airport. And since it had shed new light on the possible motives behind the heinous crime, Marlene decided to let authorities in on this newfound information, hoping to bring justice to her daughter. The detectives arrived at Logan Airport and began questioning Northwest Airlines employees, who they suspected had been mentioned in Sue's diary. Deborah Mazikis, one of Sue's coworkers, said that some men in her crew resented women in a position of authority. Some came to terms with it while the others liked it. According to Deborah, Sue was always very conscientious about her job and always tried to make it a better place to work. Sue was certain that she could make a difference for the minorities and the women who worked there. Everything Marlene read in Sue's diary inched her closer towards believing that Sue was set up by her coworkers that night on September 13, 1992. She was sure that Sue had been lured to go to the restaurant by someone she most definitely knew. According to Marlene, Sue's coworkers thought that by harassing her, they could make her quit the job and get rid of her. But when that didn't work, they resorted to doing the most horrible thing. Although the new developments in Sue's case gave detectives a new direction, they eventually led to another dead end. In 1995, Sue's family filed a lawsuit against Northwest Airlines for allegations of harassment Sue had to endure during her tenure at the company. Subsequently, both the parties involved reached a settlement. According to the terms of the agreement of the settlement, Northwest Airlines handed a $75,000 payout to Sue's estate, along with a commitment to offer a $250,000 reward to anyone who would provide any information leading to an arrest and conviction in Sue's case. The settlement became recognized because of being one of the most substantial discrimination settlements ever awarded in the state of Massachusetts. Northwest Airlines denied being a part of any foul play in the matter of Sue's murder. That same year, Nuzzo faced conviction on multiple charges associated with the credit card scheme, and he was handed a 3-year prison sentence. Brooks, on the other hand, opted to cooperate with the police and subsequently pleaded guilty to theft and fraud charges linked to the scheme. He received a 3-year probation sentence. In the course of time, 10 more Northwest employees found themselves indicted and subject to varying sentences in connection with the case. Alongside some of Sue's other coworkers at Northwest, both Nuzzo and Brooks were still considered potential suspects in the homicide. Regrettably, the case went cold, leaving many questions unanswered. Although Sue's father Ron passed away in 2011 and Sue's brother Ronald passed away in 2007, Marlene still stands strong, fighting every day for her daughter.
I'm saying it's 25 years. Where did that go? I just can't believe that nobody has come forward. You know, you think the guilt.
For many long years, Marlene Taraskiewicz remained committed to keeping her daughter in the public eye, persistently seeking answers. The identity of her daughter's caller still eludes her, a question that has continued to haunt her. Witnessing numerous other cold cases being solved in recent times has ignited a glimmer of hope within her. She is inspired to keep working towards getting justice for her long-gone daughter. It brings closure to the families, she reflected, highlighting that she still doesn't have that much needed closure.
I am not going away. But what I want to say to everyone is, please, I've been asking you for 24 years. My Susan was a hard worker. She worked hard at Northwest. She treated everyone equally. She was a good person. She would help you whenever she could. And I know today, if Susan was here and got to enjoy her nieces and her nephew, they would just love her truly. When I tell them stories since they were little about Susan, we would laugh. I have so many things to this day still in my home. When I talk about pencils and papers and books, Nana, was this what Susan had? Yeah. Did this come from Susan? Yeah. Susan would have done anything for them. And I tell them she would have loved you more than anything in the world because she did love people. And she felt that people should be fair. And she tried very hard at Christmas time, Halloween. She lived downstairs. We had a little apartment that belonged to my father-in-law. And she would set that up at Christmas time and Halloween and have all the kids come in. She would make them costumes. She would give them treats. They just couldn't wait for the things that Susan would do. I've heard many people at the airline tell me what a wonderful girl she was and how she would go out of the way for them.
With unwavering determination, she conveyed a clear message to the person responsible for her daughter's murder, warning them to remain vigilant at all times. They can't rest easy now, since she will never give up, and one day, eventually there will be justice.
These people that did this are looking over their shoulder every year because I'm not going anywhere. I am a fighter. My daughter was a fighter. They thought they would really get to her and she would quit. But if Susan really wanted something and she really loved what she was doing, you wouldn't get her to quit. And that's the sad thing. I mean, I'm proud of her for that because, you know, a lot of women have to go through so much on a job. And management, unions, they don't really take care of them like they do the men. But I'm proud that she fought as hard. Women are coming forward and telling what they're going through. It took Susan a long time to do that, and most women didn't do that. But now they are, and I'm so proud that they're doing that because, you know, we're all entitled to do the job you want. As long as you're qualified for it, why not do it? I hope that seeing what Sue went through, now they know just how serious this is and harassment and that, and come forward.
In her last message, issued on Wednesday, September 13, 2023, Marlene Taraskiewicz extended a heartfelt plea to anyone who had information about Sue's case and asking them to come forward. Her quest for justice and closure for her daughter had endured many difficult years, and now she wouldn't rest until the culprit is behind bars. Marlene is in constant touch with the detectives working on Sue's case and is hopeful that someday she will be able to look her daughter's killers in the eye in court. Marlene recalled that she had shared precious moments with Sue on her 50th birthday. Marlene laughed as she reminisced about the fun night out with her family.
Last time I saw Sue was my 50th birthday, and my husband took us all into a restaurant in Boston, and she was never on time for certain things, but across the calendar she put, I was on time. And of course, when you get there and we had dinner, they start talking, my three children, about things that they did that you weren't supposed to know. But we had a wonderfully, and that was the last time. So I am very grateful for that. I mean, as sad as it is, I am just so glad that it was on such a special day.
Marlene expressed her deep gratitude for the cherished memory. Despite the underlying sadness of the situation, she found solace in the fact that that memory was linked to such a significant day, making it all the more special. On Wednesday, September 13, 2023, the state police once again stated they believe that some people knew about Susan Taraskiewicz's murder, but haven't told the police. They already had some information regarding the case, but they needed more details to be sure. They wanted anyone with information to come forward and have asked the public for help in finding the person or people involved in Sue's murder. While they haven't found any new leads in the case, they were happy that Susan's story was talked about on a podcast called The Deck. This would help keep Sue's case in the talks, and if her killer was listening, it would remind them that justice wasn't far away. Thursday, September 14, 2023, marked 31 years since 27-year-old Susan Taraskiewicz's body was found in the trunk of her car. The Massachusetts State Police made it clear they were still very committed to finding the person who hurt her. Even though a long time had passed, they were still determined to catch the person responsible. As Sue's mother awaits justice, the police are actively looking for Sue's killer. They do not want to leave any stones unturned and are pursuing traditional street-level investigative methods coupled with advanced forensic techniques on the evidence they currently have. Additionally, they are reaching out to the public by creating playing cards that showcase homicide cases and missing persons. These cards are provided to state prison inmates, and the hope is that this might yield more information about the cases featured on the cards. In an old clip, Marlene urged the public to do their bit and help her out even if they had the slightest piece of information.
So, again, after 24 years, it is never, ever too late to do the right thing and to bring justice for us. Please, again, pick up that phone, call that hotline number, tell what you know. Even after 24 years, I'm sure you can remember something that will help us to bring Susan's death to a closure and give us the peace that we deserve and she deserves.
If anyone has information regarding Susan Taraskiewicz's murder, they are encouraged to contact the state police at 617-727-8817. Do you think the person who called Sue just before she left to get sandwiches was the same person who had been making those anonymous threatening calls to Sue for many nights? Did he lure Sue towards him by offering to reveal his identity? Do you think that the guilt would someday get to Sue's killer and they would eventually come forward? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. If there is a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comments section below. For more captivating true crime stories, like, share, and subscribe to our channel.